I started painting as a teenager in the San Fernando Valley in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The atom bomb had already proved we were capable of wiping out mankind with a single push of a button. And the concept that we are all at the mercy not of God, but of an almighty machine made me begin to explore what it means to be human in an increasingly technological society. Identity, or the lack of identity, is a theme I have examined since my first paintings, in which amorphous fields of color swirled and mingled into forms that resembled life in its earliest stages. Conversely, at the same time, a series of paintings portrayed giant machine men created out of hard geometric shapes. Both these early sets of paintings presented human-like forms that lacked individual identity and had no obvious soul. This theme carried over into the next phase of my work in the early 1970s. Inspired by the paintings of Soutine and Francis Bacon, my earliest installations involved pieces of meat, bound and constrained by cables and bolts. The visceral and temporal nature of the meat contrasted with the cold indestructibility of the plastic sheeting and steel cables. Like an animal trapped in an industrial machine, the contorted red flesh evoked both curiosity and repulsion. It also juxtaposed man's impermanence against technology's durability. The meat would decay, but the hardware would last forever. In my first professional exhibit in 1975, I took the themes introduced in the meatworks a step further. I had rented an abandoned skating rink to use as a studio. The 10,000 square foot space had a Quonset-style ceiling that reached 50 feet at its apex. The Unit in Flames series entailed large man-made structures of steel or concrete, or mounds of sand and gravel, at the center of which was placed an aborted human fetus. With a few invited spectators watching from the edge of the expansive installation, I set the structure on fire. The unit, tiny and soft at the center of a harsh and threatening environment, became visible amid the flickering flames. At Orlando Gallery in Sherman Oaks, I exhibited photos and drawings of the Unit in Flames installations. Plus, I brought in a 1,000-pound concrete triangle with the fetus placed in a depression at its center. The unit represented man at his most vulnerable, alone amid an angular, symmetrical construction of his own design. In the late 1970s, I began doing performances on the themes of identity and dehumanization. Dressed in a plain white jumpsuit, I became the unit in a series of performances that explored man's relationship to the urban environment. After moving from the Valley to downtown Los Angeles, I had my first experiences with the nameless outcasts that populate Skid Row and the area around my studio. This experience inspired a series of performances, films, and photo structures featuring me crouching and growling and crawling behind a burning mask. We often look past the homeless as if they don't exist. They might as well wear masks because we rarely look at them as people anyway. The fire symbolized the rage behind the mask at society's callous dismissal of these human beings. For a series of performances about depersonalization, including Unit in Orange in Boston in 1979, I had shaved individual digits of my Social Security number onto my head and marched rigidly around the inside of a triangular room built in the gallery. I was carrying a fetus in my cupped hands. A tape-recorded chant of Wunderkinder, or Wonder Child, punctuated my steps as I paced back and forth from one wall of the room to another. Numbered according to governmental and societal regulations, and clad in a generic white jumpsuit, I had no more personal identity than the unit itself. In a performance I did called Pope Video, I walked with a cross on my back from Los Angeles to San Diego. The cross had a video monitor inside of it showing a continuous loop of the Pope's public appearances. The 6-day performance provoked a variety of responses from those I crossed paths with. I was blessed in some areas and reviled in others, and it had less to do with my intentions, which remained a constant, and more to do with the interpretations of the piece by those that encountered it.
What I found out is walking with this cross and people examining religion is that the cross meant a whole multitude of things. It meant everything and nothing.
The piece called into question the absolute authority of the church and the blind faith that many people have in organized religion. In the early 1980s, my lifelong interest in filmmaking prompted me to make a documentary about the new wave of artists inhabiting lofts in downtown Los Angeles. Young Turks looks at the lives and the work of 13 artists, myself included, in the context of the societal wasteland that much of downtown was at the time.
The night is but a pup. I can't answer your question.
Amid the artists' profiles and interviews are vignettes of homeless people and the characters of the Market District and Skid Row.
You understand? I'm a lost person.
Throughout the years, whether I was making films, doing performances and installations, or simply painting, recurring imagery has included skulls, skeletons, masks, and body outlines. Works in the 90s, however, countered the depersonalization of such imagery with an invitation to the viewer to literally become a part of the piece. Both the Buddha on Moneybags and the Body Bag series were installed on the floor of the gallery, and each allowed the spectator to make a choice of how he or she would experience the work. Whether the viewer chose to look at them, walk on them, or actually sit on them, or even crawl inside of them, as with the body bags, the action of the spectator became a part of the work. In the early 1990s, concurrent with my gallery shows of Buddha on Moneybags, I was one of the people behind a series of guerrilla exhibits in which a group of artists descended on a public space, had a big party, and installed site-specific work that would stay in place until theft or demolition or city sanitation workers removed it. With titles like Art Above the Law, Right to Remain Silent, and No Admission, the Red Zone shows were meant to move art out of conventional settings and into truly public spaces. The first Red Zone was installed on the exterior brick wall of a building east of Little Tokyo. For my contribution to the show, I returned to a medium of my youth, fresh meat. I made a silhouette of myself out of flank steaks and nailed it to the wall. At another Red Zone, I installed a triangular arrangement of Buddha on Moneybags paintings in the pit where a building had once stood. The Red Zones were wild, lawless, one-night happenings, sometimes cut short by the arrival of law enforcement. The work was meant to be as temporary as the experience itself. More recently, I have been making paintings for exhibit in my own front yard in Echo Park. I call it my yard show. People can stroll by it or drive by it 24 hours a day. Founded on a baseball theme, specifically Dodger baseball, the haikus about America's pastime are often laden with universal meaning. There is almost always something more going on beneath the surface. A lot has changed in the 40 years since my first show. We are still at the mercy of an all-powerful machine, one that dehumanizes even as it connects us on a global scale. But I'm still making art, And that, to me, is what it means to be human.